Hey guys, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the OneGauge digital to analog converter. We call it the DAC or DAC. Show you around how you can connect up to analog gauges and convert digital readings from an ECU. In this case, I'm using an OBD-II vehicle into readings for an analog gauge. This works with any ECU that OneGauge is compatible with, so things like Holley, Phytech, Edelbrock, any aftermarket ECU that has a CAN bus output. And like I mentioned, of course, OBD-II as well. And then it converts that data into signals used by traditional analog gauges. So I'm powering this demo unit just with a good old Ryobi 18 volt battery. You can see when I plugged it in, everything clicked on. So the wiring here is relatively simple. We've got just the main power wires going into the hub. And then these are the power and the ground wires for our gauges themselves. You can see our gauges are showing some readings, so we're going to need to calibrate those and make sure that they are calibrated correctly. So the calibration steps are pretty simple. You've got a screen that's included with the OneGauge DAC that will allow you to calibrate everything. I will walk you through it real quick, but essentially you don't have to do this with the unit installed in the vehicle. You can pre-program it. You just have to have it connected to your gauges. So you can see here, these three wires here, this is my tach out wire that goes to the tachometer, and then I've got a wire for the oil pressure gauge and for the coolant temperature gauge. And wiring diagrams are in our instructions on OneGauge.com/FAQs. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick overview of how you set up and calibrate the gauges. As I mentioned, we're using OBD-II as our input. We have lots of other input options, from standard sensors all the way up to aftermarket ECUs like Holley, Phytech, and so on. But today we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to calibrate our coolant temperature and RPM, which are both going to come in from OBD-II. So you've got 6 different outputs here on the circuit board on the OneGauge hub that allow you to plug into the different gauges that you have. The first 4 are meant for traditional pressure and temperature gauges, and then the last 2 outputs are meant for your tachometer and speedometer gauges. So we're going to just start this calibration. I've got the coolant temperature gauge hooked into this second terminal here, so I'm going to use gauge number 2, begin calibration. So I do want to set that as coolant temperature. Now, if I wanted to go crazy and do something different, for example, maybe I want to see fuel pressure displayed on that gauge instead of coolant temperature, wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense in this case, but you could definitely do that. But I am going to use coolant temperature, hit save. So because this gauge has numbers already printed on it, I'm going to stick with that range, so 100 to 250. However, if you didn't have numbers that were printed on there, you could use whatever low and high points for the gauge that you wanted to. So for example, you could use 0 as your low point or 200 degrees, and it would just display 200 to 250 or whatever you set the high value as well. In this case, I'm using the low value on my gauge. So 100, I'm going to save that. So on this one, you want the low position is the position of the needle, and you want to be pushing this button until you just start to see the needle creep up to where you want it to be. Now in my case, I had already tested it, so I had set it at 16, which is about where it needs to be. You can see that needle just moving up and down a tiny bit because these steps are very small, allows you to be pretty accurate. So I'm going to set it on 18 in this case, and that's right at 100. And then here, so let's start it at 0, and I'll show you the gauge. You can bump it up. Oh, sorry, that's the high value. So we want to set this at 100, or sorry, 250, because that is the high value on the gauge. Set to 0, go to 200 and then 250. And then for the actual needle sweep, I'm going to set it, so you can see it swings pretty wildly if you go in groups of 10. I want to set it right as that needle hits 250. So I'm going to keep moving it up right there. So I'm going to set it at 145. Great. And now we can test it. Notice this test screen, it actually affects all of your gauges. That's totally normal. It's just, it's testing whatever reading you put in across all gauges. So right now I have it set to 170. Calibration's just a little bit off. I could adjust it if I really wanted to. But what I'm most concerned with is that it really starts to get to be accurate in the high range of the gauge. So 30, 40. Yeah, so it's reading a little bit high right now, and that's because analog gauges aren't a linear calibration. What you're going to want to do is really make sure that the calibration focuses on the most important part of your range, which for me is going to be around the 200 mark. So that's pretty close, and I'll just know that this reads just a little bit high, a few degrees high. And I could go back and recalibrate it, shift the range down if I chose to. So I'm going to save that, and that is how I calibrate my gauge. All right, so I've got everything hooked up and ready to test out. I'm going to power on the main setup. You can see the needles jump up, and then I'm going to start the car here. Now you'll see my OBD-II readings kick in as soon as the car turns on. My temp's running at about 150. I've got a TAC reading that matches there. And then, let's see, you can take a look at my temp gauge. So obviously this is a dummy gauge here. It's not going to give me an exact reading, but now I have an exact reading of about 160, 170 degrees. You can see that climbing as the engine runs. And then if I tap the gas a little bit, I can get some needle movement there. Got a little flutter, so I need to add a little bit of smoothing to it. But in general, it is tracking right along with the stock TAC gauge. So there's my test. Everything's calibrated and good to go. And my DAC is working as it should. Appreciate you watching. If you have questions, feel free to reach out.